Damon awoke in a panic, heart hammering. The dream had felt so real. Not merely a dream, something more. A presence in the room, something just outside the edge of perception. The name she whispered in his ear still echoed in his skull. Sarah. But he didn't know any Sarah. At least, not yet. Love had never been his strong suit. He'd been a serial charmer, always restless. Until Helen. She blindsided him and had him under her spell before he knew what was happening. Then she left. Without drama, just quiet disappointment. They remained in contact, exchanging occasional messages, but he knew she wasn't coming back. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the loneliness clawed at him worse than usual this Valentine's Day, and drove him into a throng of desperate singles in a bar he'd usually avoid. Then he saw her, alone, breathtaking, like she'd stepped out of an old film, untouched by time. He watched as other men noticed her, but none dared approach. It was as if she existed just outside of reality, slightly out of step with the world around her. Summoning his signature confidence and charisma, he took his chance. She introduced herself. Sarah. Her voice was melodic, smooth, yet something about it sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. They talked for hours, seeming to drift into a private reality where only they existed. Yet she revealed nothing about herself. Every time he pressed for details, where she lived, what she did, she would steer the conversation elsewhere. She was perfect. Too perfect. It wasn't until later that evening that he noticed the first crack in reality. They laughed, sipped their drinks, and their reflection in the mirror behind the bar happened to catch his eye. Her face was smudged, shifting, like an image that couldn't hold her shape. The longer he looked, the more distorted she became. Damon turned back to her. She smiled at him, drawing him back into their private, shared reality. Perfect, unchanged. As the bartender announced last call, Damon opened his mouth to ask for Sarah's number, but found himself inviting her back to his place instead. He half expected her to bolt, offended by the forward request. Instead, she smiled even brighter, took his hand, and led him out of the bar. Morning came, but Sarah was gone. No message, not a trace. Even the bed beside him looked untouched. Had she left before dawn? Or had she even been there at all? Damon tried to go back to his daily routine, but then the whispers started. At first, they were small things. The TV turning to static, his phone ringing in the middle of the night, an unknown number always silent on the other end. And then came the dreams. Or were they dreams? He would wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of her breath on his neck. Sometimes he swore he saw her in dark corners of the room, just standing, waiting. After 3 days, Damon was desperate and began searching for Sarah. She had no socials, no address, no phone number that he could identify. By pure chance, he clicked on a link in what seemed like another useless list of search results. What he found sent ice through his veins. An old newspaper article, dated 1923, with a photograph of her, Sarah. The same face, the same haunting beauty. She'd been murdered on Valentine's Day, a century ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The article spoke of another man, years later, who'd also claimed to have met her on Valentine's Day night. A man who became obsessed, and who, not long after, was found dead in his apartment, his chest carved with the initials, "She is mine." Damon knew then he wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Sarah's whisper curled around him like smoke. "You'll love me forever, won't you?" The room plunged into darkness. The last thing he saw was her smile, stretching far too wide, before the world collapsed around him, and then nothing. Valentine's Day would come again, and Sarah was waiting. They say the dead leave us messages, Some write them in dust, some whisper in the wind. But Miss K, she wrote hers in Valentine's. Every Christmas Eve, our family had a tradition. After dinner, we'd gather in my father's backyard around the fire pit. The adults sipped mulled wine and whiskey while the kids roasted marshmallows. And then came the ghost stories. Tales spun in the fire's glow, each one a little darker than the last. That year, my cousin Ben had a story to tell. A story I wasn't prepared for. As he leaned in closer, the firelight flickered against his glasses and his voice dropped to a whisper. This isn't just any ghost story. It's real. A hush settled over the group, the cold night air suddenly feeling much heavier. Ben was a science teacher at a local elementary school. He wasn't the type to believe in ghosts, but even he had to admit there were things about his school he couldn't explain. It had to do with a teacher, a woman who died before he started working there. The students still talked about her, as if she never left. They called her Miss K, he said, and they swore she was still watching over them. Ben said that he found a note left behind on the classroom chalkboard after school. Miss K, I need help with my test, it said. The next morning, the answer was written in neat cursive below the question. The room had been locked overnight. Miss K had been young, kind, one of those teachers who made kids believe in themselves, and they loved her for it. And then, one night, she was gone. Car accident. No one knew much beyond that. The kids, though, they never stopped talking about her. They left her notes on the chalkboard, whispering their secrets to an empty room, and sometimes she would write back. One girl even claimed she saw her one evening, a woman in the hallway standing by the lockers. Miss K, she called, but the figure didn't move. It just watched, and then it was gone. Every year, the students made Valentine's mailboxes. Shoeboxes decorated with hearts, cartoon characters, and crepe paper, each with a name carefully written on top. But that year, after the Valentine's party ended and the students went home, the teachers found an extra box, one that hadn't been there before. It was plain, unadorned, with only one word written on the top in black marker: Jack. No student had claimed it, and when they opened it, they found it overflowing with Valentines. Some of them were decades old. Mia and I had been inseparable once. We spent our childhood as partners in crime and our teen years as sweethearts. But then she changed, became obsessive. I'd had to cut ties, move away, and I forgot about her. Or so I thought. But she never forgot about me. Mia Kensington. Miss K. The next day I drove to Ben's school, and in the teacher's lounge I saw it, the newest box, for Jack, freshly filled. And on top, a single Valentine, one I hadn't seen since childhood. A card Mia had given me, decades ago. I turned it over, and in small, looping script, written just beneath my name, were the words, I waited. Some ghosts don't want revenge. Some just want to be remembered. Mike never expected to start over in a new town. Moving right before high school began was hard enough, but something about this place felt wrong. At first he thought it was just small-town weirdness, a quirk of unfamiliarity, feeling out of place in somewhere that didn't feel like home. But soon he'd realize this town kept secrets. The first semester came and went. Mike managed to make a few friends, but still for the most part felt like an outsider. He certainly didn't have any dating prospects. So he was particularly surprised when February rolled around and a girl he barely knew handed him a card, a small pink envelope with his name scribbled on the front. So, will you go out with me? You know, for Valentine's Day? She asked, smiling. He wasn't expecting that. Not from her. I'm not really looking for anything right now, Mike said awkwardly. Her smile vanished. Her face twisted into Not sadness. Something else. Whatever. I have other options anyway, she snapped before storming off. Mike stood there, too bewildered to respond. At lunch, Mike's friend Travis sat across from him, shaking his head. Dude, what are you doing? You can't say no to a Valentine's date. Why not? He asked. Travis stared at him like he'd just confessed to murder. Because you'll die if you're single on Valentine's Day. Mike laughed, but no one else did. Travis leaned in. I'm serious. It's the town's rule. Every year, if you're alone that night, something comes for you, and it takes your heart, literally. A chill ran down his spine. That's a joke, right? Travis shrugged. Ask around. See if anyone's laughing. The next few days, Mike started to notice things. People paired up, fast, too fast. Even kids who had barely spoken before suddenly had dates. Store shelves that once held chocolates and cards were picked clean. Not just bought, hoarded. At school, whispers of conversations filled the halls. You got someone yet? I don't care if it's fake, I just want to feel safe. Travis was right. No one was laughing. People were scared. Mike decided to do some digging into the matter. Luckily, the school library kept a microfiche collection of old local newspapers. It didn't take him long to find what he was looking for. Newspaper clippings starting nearly 80 years ago. Local man found dead, heart removed, February 14th. Tragic death in empty apartment, Valentine's Day nightmare. Officials say wild animal attack, but no blood found. Every single year. Always someone single. Always on Valentine's Day. His fingers trembled over the keyboard. Maybe this wasn't just a story. February 14th arrived. Mike was the only one left alone. As he walked home that evening, the streets were empty. The town was silent. Then he heard it. A thud. Deep, hollow. Another thud, and another. Rhythmic. Thud, 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 thud. A heartbeat. His pulse quickened, and he turned. No one was there. Thud, 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 thud. Closer now. The air was heavy, pressing in on him. A cold, rotting breath slid across the back of his neck. Mike ran. The thudding grew faster, matching his own heartbeat. Something was behind him, too close. He reached his front door, hands shaking as he fumbled for his keys. A clawed hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned. Red eyes, a smile too wide, a face half in shadow, and long, skeletal fingers reaching toward his chest. In sheer panic, Mike yanked his backpack open and grabbed the box of chocolates he'd bought days ago. Please, be my Valentine. Silence. Then a chuckle. A twisted, inhuman laugh. The creature reached out, its clawed fingers gently brushing his cheek. How sweet, it whispered before taking the chocolates. Then it was gone. The next morning, Mike woke up drenched in sweat. His shirt was torn, and on his chest was a faint scar, a perfect shallow crescent right over his heart, a warning and a promise. Now every year, Mike leaves a gift, a box of chocolates, a card, sometimes roses, and every year the gift disappears overnight, and somewhere in the distance he hears the heartbeat, waiting, watching, until the day it finally comes to take what it came for.